Good afternoon, everyone. Really happy to welcome you to the STA and SWIB Joint Fireside Chat. And my name is Moore Armoni. I'm the Stern Vice Dean of Faculty. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Carmelle Cadet. Carmelle is the founder and CEO of EMTECH, a fintech company helping central banks modernize their financial market infrastructure with blockchain, AI, and data analytics. Carmelle is a passionate advocate of blockchain and digital currency technology for payment modernization and financial inclusion efforts. In her last role at IBM, Carmelle led the global business development efforts in IBM blockchain for payments. Carmelle holds a BS in finance and earned her executive MBA at Stern, so she's our alumna. At EMTECH, Carmelle and her team are on a clear mission to build inclusive, safe, and resilient financial infrastructures with digital currencies to unleash new markets and opportunities for everyone. Please join me in welcoming Carmelle. Carmelle, welcome home to Stern.
Thank you, Maura. Thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be back. It's a pleasure to always network with the NYU crew, with the Stern crew. So thank you for welcoming me. Looking forward for the chat.
Thank you, Dean Armoni. We really appreciate the intro. My name's Jenna Link. I am co-president of the Stern Technology Association, and we're so excited to have you here, Carmelle, to speak with both myself, Najma, who is the president of the Stern Women in Business Association, as well as Professor Segram, to do a deep dive into some of the initiatives your company is working on. And with that, I will pass it off to Najma to ask the first question.
Hi, Carmelle. Thank you so much for joining us. So our first question is, you clearly have a very impressive resume from IBM, and now you founded your own company, EMTECH. Could you tell us more about how your career has progressed and what drew you to the technology industry?
Sure. So I wasn't always into technology, that's for sure. So a bit of background, I moved to the US when I was 17. I was born and raised in Haiti, and was fortunate enough as I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do in my undergrad to land an internship. Someone told me about, a good friend of mine told me about an internship opportunity or a program, and I decided to apply and get an internship at IBM. After the internship, I realized that I loved corporate finance. It was something that I could do, and I actually ended up loving the company and understanding what technology could do for people. I think any former or current IBMer will tell you, as far as the vision and the role that technology can play in businesses and societies, sometimes you get to see that at companies like IBM. So I got to see that as far as how you can have a global impact and really impact people's life with technology. So I joined IBM full-time after that, so doing finance, and I got deep into understanding how to commercialize IT, and then got very fortunate to have a manager who sponsored me for my MBA, and I came to Stern for my executive MBA, and then I fell in love with business, and after 6 years at IBM, I could come into the executive MBA program, apply the experience in the corporate world, and it made more sense at that time, and I could go back and be more effective as a business leader with a finance background. So that's kind of my sweet spot. And then as you go through different roles, you kind of get to know new technologies, and I stumbled upon blockchain, fell in love with the opportunity and what it represented. I was always an advocate for financial inclusion. So that's where those two things kind of came together, the technology and the passion and the mission. So I think for me, financial inclusion came first and technology came after, mainly because of my experience coming from a emerging small country, kind of not having access to digital finance, and got to see what it's like in the US. So that's how I fell in love, and that's how I got started. So I've been very lucky to have a 10-year career at IBM. So it was good.
Wow, that's great to hear. And just understanding your passion about how the background tied into the importance of financial inclusion and what that means to you and how your passion for tech then evolved as well. Is that what inspired you to found EMTECH, your company? Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, that's at the core of what the company is really about. So I bring that now to 10 years later. I have an appreciation for also not only passion, but how do you commercialize your passion? How do you turn that into a viable business model? How do you come up with metrics and have a go-to-market plan? How do you sell something to a client? How do you solve an actual problem, right? That's really what it comes down to. But yes, I wanted to solve the financial inclusion problem. I believe it's a untapped opportunity, and that's proven in the fact that a lot of companies are trying to solve it, right? A lot of companies are targeting that population because in a digital economy, that's just a low-hanging fruit that has been left behind that we need to address. The Libras and a lot of big companies from different continents and different places are trying to address that. So yeah, that is at the core of who we are. We have a particular strategic approach that is a bit different, and that really started with as we're working in the digital currency space, kind of seeing a new opportunity around the fact that central banks, as an institutions, are actually the ones responsible for the digital currency or financial infrastructure. So we decided to go work with them. We decided to put a business structure that says, how can we help them provide infrastructure that actually address the financial inclusion problem. So I can talk more about that, but that is absolutely the core of what EMTECH is all about.
Wow, that's great to hear.
Mm-hmm. And, one thing that I think we think a lot about here at Stern is entrepreneurship, and there's many ambitious entrepreneurs here. Could you speak more about the process of founding your own business? And, how did you know it was time to leave IBM and strike out on your own?
Yeah, I'll say this. I'm not sure if Professor Okun teaches the MBA program, but I thought about Professor Okun a few times before I did that. But ironically, the fire started at Stern, right? I think if any of my classmates joined the call, shout out to A15 from the MBA class. The papers, the conversations, the group projects, I always forced them to talk about mobile money somehow. It was always part of what I wanted to work on. And I was fortunate enough to have people who would go along. And there are a few papers actually I pulled up the other day and say, what was it the assumption that we made? This is pretty close. And I texted a few of them and said, this is ironic that we're kind of going back to that. But the journey itself, I think, started a long time ago. I always knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I always knew that I wanted to kind of take something and put my vision on it and then bring it to fruition, right? Bring it to life. I love that process. I got very lucky to work in a company that I had a career, I enjoyed, I had different experiences, and I could actually witness that happen. I love that. I really fell in love with that concept of building technology to solve a problem. So in a way, it was a matter of time. But when do you jump, right? When do you make the call? And people ask me all the time, did you really leave your 6-figure job to go start a new company? Working with central banks, that's a whole other issue. It's not a cool app. I don't have a cool app. I can't tell everyone to go in the App Store right now and check out my app. Not yet. But it was a risky proposition in the sense of kind of the market, being able to have that balance between intuition and data, and deciding when to make the call. For me, it was a very personal experience, to be honest. I was really scared. I was really afraid. So the first person I called, honestly, was actually my colleague from Stern. She's a very successful, the network
That's
is
amazing.
strong.
That's so good to hear. We like knowing that, even digitally.
The network is strong. Yeah, shout out to Vali. I love you. She is a very successful executive and entrepreneur on her own. So I was scared, did not know what to do, and I called her and kind of talked through it. It's not that people have the answers, but having someone to talk to say that you're not crazy, or to ask you the question to make sure that you're not crazy, is definitely a helpful part of the process. But then after a few weeks of kind of just talking to my family, talking to my husband, I have a 3-year-old, and, how do you make the call, and kind of jumping into something like this, then it was at a moment you just kind of pull the trigger, right? You just pull the trigger. So it was July 1st, 2019, I sent in my notes, and then I went on LegalZoom and started a company, and I'll see the typical, nothing fancy. I did not have any big investment or any kind of idea on the back of a napkin that I got funding for. It was really kind of a gut call. But I'll talk more about the market. It's fascinating what has happened since then. So coming into almost a year.
Wow. I mean, it's great to hear your perspective and how real it was, the risk and the fear, and just understanding what that entailed going into it, and really just having that leap of faith. I guess building off of that a little, were there specific obstacles you faced in that process? And were any of them potentially particular to being a woman or minority as an entrepreneur? And if you have any advice or looking back reflections on how you overcame those obstacles?
Sure. So I think it's fair to say that this time you can actually get real-time feedback, because I am going through a process of trying to raise capital, and then COVID happened. And then so as a woman, and we know the stats, right? And I think the research 0.0006% of kind of minority women get funded, especially from a VC perspective. And the idea is that it is a real struggle, right? But on top of that, I think what makes it an additional difficult position, which I fully realize, having been on the other side, right, on the corporate side, to analyze a sound venture and investment. It is. I am going into a market that's pretty risky. I am going into a market that the reward is just is broad and attractive, but that's because the risk is also there, right? But the confidence of being able to execute and put a sound business structure around it is what I have and what I control. So that's what I'm trying to sell. And given the lack of precedence, to be honest, because when you think about EMTECH, we are essentially a fintech for central banks, for regulators. We're making a big bet that software and technology will change the way regulators engage with private sector companies. And we want to be a fintech that participates in that and building new infrastructure and new systems. But that has not been done before. Not the way we're talking about it, not using blockchain technology, not to provide digital cash to people, not the way we're approaching it. So there's a bit of a level as well from pure business perspective. But as a woman, I do find myself being the only woman at the table sometimes. I think even not in the blockchain space, for sure. There are a lot of women in blockchain space, which is amazing. Absolutely. Yeah.
Surprised.
Yes, no, absolutely. So it's amazing. I've worked with Marie Wake. I think was here a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of amazing women who are doing a lot in blockchain, but in the financial and the fintech space, in fintech, central banks, digital currency, financial inclusion, SaaS, all that combination. I am the only person around the table kind of bringing that perspective to the table. And I'm proud of that, right? Now it's a matter of how do I package it and make it something that people can be attracted to. But that's a tall order, right? I'm not a central banker, for example, right? That's not my field. But I have an idea of how to put solutions and technology forward for that. So we'll see. I'll give you feedback more, but we are having difficulty raising money as far as making the case for something like that. So that is a strategic decision that we're going through as far as how do we pivot through COVID and come out of COVID, and what is the strategy right now.
That's really interesting. No, thank you so much for walking us through that process. One thing I think that you've sort of mentioned that I find interesting, and I'm sure many people on the call, is just the power of like building a network and figuring out, how to be a mentor to others, how to get mentors. Can you just talk about in your career how you've sought out mentors and how you've sort of really been able to build up a network that you can, call up and say, I'm thinking about starting my own company. What do you think I should do? And what kind of advice do you have for people like us who are really going out into the business world now, thinking about how do I build up that network?
No, absolutely. First, I'm a child of mentorship. I am a child of mentorship. I call mentors and my network, honestly, if I were to, I play with my son that I'm super mommy. So if I were to think about a superpower, is being able to call people and tap into people and ask questions. That's a superpower if you ask me. So being able to tap into that network and finding mentors and also mentor others is something that I think is absolutely vital, at least from my perspective. So I'll tell you what my journey was. If you are graduating right now, and I know it's a tough time for the job market right now, it is, and people are going to have to get creative, and we'll see how everything shakes out. But if you were to get a role into a new company, finding if the culture is there for mentorship, it was at IBM, right? I mean, in my internship, I was assigned two mentors to work with. And it's a structure that allows you to have someone to talk to. So the person that I worked with was a mentor, became a mentor. The person that they assigned me to became a mentor, and they're still mentors today. They still are today, 10 years later, right? So I tapped into them for different reasons. Sometimes you'll be surprised how, if you're coming in and saying, this is what I want, right? This is what I'm thinking. Can you tell me what you think about that? Sometimes things are not as clear cut, right? That's a mentor. If someone takes time to kind of help you think through something, it doesn't have to be kind of a formal mentorship. Find the value in somebody helping you, right? However that is when it comes to your career. And then there's definitely a difference between mentorship and sponsorship. I've seen how both can work very well. I've had sponsorship that kind of landed me into new roles at IBM, and I've had mentorship that kind of I never saw her work, but this is my mentor I talk to. Here's what I know of her. So that relationship and that network really helps. And so that was in a corporate setting. What I was afraid of actually leaving IBM is not having a corporate, because sometimes when you spend so much time in a corporate setting, you really don't end up building a network outside the company, which is scary. So definitely maintain a network outside. So in case you leave, that you do have someone to land on. And my outside network was NYU. That was the only thing I had. And then from there, you kind of build new, right? When you go to, I go to events and people get really passionate about what I'm doing. They can't particularly help. They can't particularly participate officially, but they say, call me anytime you want. And I have someone like that I've exchanged. He's like, I can't be officially, but I'm happy to just help you do what you're doing, right? So that, take it, don't be open-minded about how mentorship works, but definitely very powerful to have.
That's so great to hear. And actually, SWIB, the Women's Club, has a summer mentorship program that I'm participating in, and I met virtually with my mentor for this summer and was speaking to her yesterday. And so hearing that you're still relying on the Stern network to kind of carry through and bridge that to your outside network is amazing to hear. I guess
what I would say too, Jenna, is it takes two, right? It takes two, because sometimes mentors will not always come back and schedule time with you. So it takes two. The mentors have to be willing to help, but you have to be diligent. Sometimes if you need to reschedule a couple of times, don't take it personal. Just reschedule and adjust, right? So that's what helps. Sometimes someone told me that. It's like, it's one thing to be a good mentor, it's another thing to be a good mentee.
Sure. And I guess kind of building off that, either from a mentee or mentor perspective, what is the best advice you've given or received in your career? And what advice would you give to someone who potentially wants to pursue a similar career path?
I think my best advice, and it's really hard to do now, when you're actually, let me say that when you're in a moment, but it's to actually just learn from every experience that you have. Find a lesson. Even if your boss is terrible, or even if you hate the job, or you have to do something in the meantime, you never know what you're going to pick up from a role, from a job that's going to be helpful to you 10 years from now. It's just amazing, right? Kind of having that perspective. So if I were to tell myself something 10 years ago, that would be that. It's just focus on learning, because you're going to make it out of the bad situation. The only thing that you're going to have to take with you out of it is what you learn. And if you learn nothing, then you have really wasted the time, right? Then you just have pain and waste of time. But that actually enriches you too. As far as the similar career path, when I look at what makes me better, or at least what allowed me to be confident enough, at least I know enough to know that I need to know more, but enough to know that I can get started somewhere, right? I could put, something together to say something, but I need a lot more people to come help me and do whatever my vision is. In that sense, developing core business acumen is really the requirement, right? Being able to think about the finance side of it, the business success, the commercialization of a product, and understanding who you need to help you build it, right? That's something that I had a chance to see, especially from even within IBM. It takes a village to build anything. You don't have to know everything, but you have to know what you have in order for you to say, okay, this is my vision and here's what I need to build it. And that's something that I picked up by, saying, okay, I can understand the finance. I know price times P times Q equals revenue, right? And how do you do cash-based accounting or accrual accounting, right? I mean, you laugh, and I know that I was saying that because it matters. It matters. I'm coming back to tell everyone it matters.
Do you have a class that you would recommend to everyone as like a must-have take class at Stern?
Oh my goodness. Yes. My class is going to kill me for this. We had the best accounting teacher. I'm going to send you the name. Oh my God. White hair. He teaches in the EMBA program.
Okay.
I'm sure someone will find him. Please share the name. Is
it Bartov?
Yes.
Okay.
Hands down.
Oh, amazing.
Hands down, best teacher ever. And I want to take the opportunity to say that I actually saved about, it's too much information, but $20,000 on taxes just by knowing the difference, right? Of cash-based accounting and accrual-based accounting. Thank you, Professor Bartol.
That's amazing. That's so great to hear. It sounds very practical.
It's true. So those basics are important to understand when it comes to finance. And then marketing is very important too, right? The case studies when it comes to business strategy, that helped a lot in building a foundation on what is a business, what do you need to focus on, what do you need to build. Everything else, or when you take that and you couple it with the idea, I think that's where you get a sweet spot of having a good shot of doing something.
Yeah, I think this next question dovetails really well with what we're talking about. Is I think sometimes it can feel hard to know that the skills that we are learning now in the MBA program have like real payoff down the road. So could you just speak about, some of the specific skills that you found really valuable as an entrepreneur, and how you were able to use the MBA program to really build them up?
Sure. So I find myself thinking about case studies a lot. When it comes to thinking about different strategies and having blind spots sometimes on what decisions to make. So I think having perspective, what case studies always did for me is give me perspective of what it's like to be in the shoe of an executive, of making decisions. Public speaking. So the advanced communication class, I never took that. I was so scared of it, to be honest, given the horror stories I've heard from it. but I picked it up some from other classes, and that was very helpful. Again, it's one of those things when you take the class, sometimes it's annoying, or it's, you really don't, it's like, is this really the best way to learn this? Negotiations class. I highly recommend. There are different structures of doing it. We took a class that really forced us to negotiate with our colleagues in class and people that you're friends with, and so you learn, real business skills that way, right? And we used to go out and actually have to implement this stuff in real life, and come back. Being able to tap into someone who is in a different industry than you, about a particular problem is also something I think Stern does really well. So you kind of have a network. You might tap into someone who has experienced differently than you did. But I would say for sure, finance, strategy, entrepreneurship. I know I started kidding about Professor Okun. Professor Okun did a good job kind of really really scaring you about going into entrepreneurship. And I think it's warranted, right? It's warranted because when you make big decisions like this, you better have thought through, at least have a plan, right, on how you mitigate your risks and how you address your weaknesses. But that, all of that kind of came in to make me who I am. And then you take that and put it in the context of I'm either a CFO or a deputy CFO in IBM, or I'm a business development manager. Being able to apply that in real life examples and real life work was really also helpful. And then the globalization aspect of it, right? So we took trips. I highly recommend, so before COVID, recommend people to do international trips. It's very helpful. I know people sometimes, and it was a mix of fun and business. It was really structured. It allowed us to be exposed to different cultures and different business requirements, which was really good. So I got a lot from Stern. I got a ton.
That's great to hear. And actually, our class selection was due yesterday at midnight. And I did put Okun down for a class. So I'm very excited to hear you say that. I haven't taken one.
Be emotionally prepared.
Yeah, that's what I've been told. So I'm excited. You've reassured my decision. And then the last question before we pass things off to Professor Segram, kind of just taking a step back at a larger scope of technology in general. What do you think the biggest challenge facing the technology industry is at the moment? And whether that's related to EMTECH or general technology? Obviously, we're in COVID now, and we'd love to know your thoughts.
Yeah, so broad.
Very broad.
I think the biggest thing when it comes to technology now is going to be education and adoption, because the industry stakeholders, people who are in this stuff and care about tech, are going to want to move much faster. However, you're building tech for people. You're building tech for businesses, essentially. And the reality is you also have to sell them and hope that they move as fast as you do. And you can't do that if you don't educate them. You can't do that if you really don't work with them and help them understand why the transition is needed. So I think that's going to be the biggest obstacle moving forward. I don't think it was particularly the case, especially when you see how fast people have adopted, mobile technology and certain things as far as mobile apps for just about anything, right? We order Amazon for one toothbrush or something. So it's it's kind of becoming part of life. But I think post-COVID, there's going to, given how much new technology or how much of a change of a transformation that we're going to go through, not everyone will be able to move as fast, because some people are still, it's a range, right? The development cycle, I call it, where people are in different stages of how they adopt technology. I'm still using my iPhone 8 because I don't want to move to the other one. So I think that's the biggest challenge, and that's part of something that we really think about, and that's part of why I love the idea of working with Professor Segram and try to address kind of understanding economic impact and economic psychology, and to address that. because I don't think as a tech company, oftentimes it's not a tech problem, right? Tech makes it better. I mean, I like to say that, right? Tech makes it better. But there's a lot of psychology that goes into adopting tech, and I think we'll have to address that too.
Well, speaking of Professor Segram, I know he's so excited to do a deep dive in some of the more technical aspects that you're working with, so I'd love to welcome him. Thanks, Professor Segram. Najma and I are going to pass it off to you now.
Thank you, ladies. Thank you.
Thanks, Carmelle.
Thank you, Jenna. Thanks, Najma. Welcome back to Stern, Carmelle. What a journey from Haiti to Florida to New York to IBM to Stern to a founder. Congratulations.
You know my whole life now.
Congratulations on a very productive journey.
Thank you. For the NYU crew who do know, I'm just a lucky bastard. That's something we learn in ethics class, and it's true. I'm just lucky to be here.
Congratulations again. So let's dive into this financial inclusion. What does financial inclusion mean to you?
For me, it's really the basic concept of everyone having access to the same level of financial services. Just that basic access universally. There should not be a threshold to get into a digital finance world, into basic finance services, like being able to hold your money in a safe way, being able to pay someone regardless of how small the transaction is, and being able to use your money without a big infrastructure that really puts red tape around how you can access that money in a digital way. So for me, that should be available to anyone, to every country around the world. That's what financial inclusion is for me.
I completely agree with you on that, Carmelle. My view is take 1.7 billion people around the world are unbanked, not underbanked, unbanked, right? And if you take about 1.6 billion people around the world, they live day-to-day wages. So the COVID had completely exposed the structural failure in financial inclusion, not just in the United States, but around the world.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that when you invited me to be an advisor, I don't know how well I'm going to advise the company, but I'm really excited to be a partner with you in this journey to include everybody in our financial system. You are passionate about it. I am passionate about it. I feel I have found my partner in it.
I love having advisors like you. I love this. This is my secret weapon that people don't usually see, but this is the passion that I work with. My team is like this. My advisors are like this. I love it. Thank you.
That's my pleasure. I don't know how you found me, but you found me. I'm glad that you found me. So let's talk about this G2P, government to person. Right?
Yeah.
Advantages of G2P is when the government reaches out to the masses, the individuals directly, the cost for the government as well as for the recipients go down. Could you please enlighten us a little bit on that?
Sure. So it's if you take a step back and think about how the financial market is actually structured around the world today, it's a pretty standard structure. It's a two-tier model where money is created by the central bank, which is the government's bank as well. But it is funneled through a banking sector that in most developed countries, most people use. But there's a cost that comes with it, right? It's a private sector model. They have margins, that they have incentives. You will never hear me bash the banks. My first real job was a teller at the bank, and I have an appreciation for the business model. But the fact of the matter is that after a good 20 years now, we've been talking about the problem of financial inclusion, even longer than that, is that we are left still with a gap that is really more reliant, or kind of forces you to think about what is the limit of the private sector and when does the government come in? And then you see use cases where government do the government do need to get involved to fill a gap. And that's what we're seeing during COVID right now, how the Federal Reserve had to step up and Congress has to step up and countries around the world have to step up and say, we're going to give and help, right? So there are use cases like that are extreme, but even on a day-to-day basis, when you think about benefits and how the government support, provide safety nets. Today, the infrastructure is pretty old, right? It's not efficient.
Exactly right.
The digital currency era is the thing because there are gaps in the current system. If the current system was great and there was no opportunity and it was actually efficient, Facebook Libra would not particularly be a concern like it is for central banks today. There would be no kind of risk to get governments out of the money business, for example. So there is a real problem. And when government need to send money to people, the question that we're contemplating now, especially in the context of post-COVID, is how much concentration do you have through the banking sector? Should the central bank play a role that provides the government a direct access to the people, whether they have a bank account or not? So that kind of conversation is very, very important as far as government to people being able to have that impact. But for you to have the impact that at least that they want, the infrastructure has to be there, and it's not, or at least not efficiently.
Very well said. I completely agree with you. When we can have blockchain as a service, transportation as a service, I'm not understanding why don't we have government as a service? You like that?
I like that.
Yes. So why don't?
Yeah, I think a lot of people would want that. Pick what you want, right? I just want choices, right?
Right.
I think that is a very good point. And I think sometimes people kind of really get scared about talking about the role of government and centralization and power. And those fears are positioned sometimes, right? But in certain circumstances, we're talking about people who want access to this, who need access to this, who need a support system for them to either transition through the phase of their life that they are in now, to recover from what a crisis looks like, or sometimes this is a global crisis, but right. There are millions and millions of people who go through crises all the time, every day in America and around the world, when they lose their jobs, when they become sick, when their kids become sick, when their parents become sick. That's a crisis to your life, right? When you have right. to move your mom and dad in your house, and then you have your husband and kids. It's a way of life that people have come to be accustomed to. But the idea is, how do you provide a financial market infrastructure that does not make it more expensive for those just because they don't have the banking relationship? Then they end up paying more because of that, right? And when you think about why they're not in the banking relationship, is because sometimes they can't afford it. So to put them in a situation where they end up having to jump through more hoops to get access to digital finance, to get access to even receive economic support that everyone else is receiving, but they're not receiving just because they're not as well on a better infrastructure as everyone else. I think that's it's worth looking at. And like you said, it's at least a $2 billion customer base globally, and more when you think about the underbanked as well.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Just for full disclosure to the audiences, I have joined EMTECH as an advisor to the company, and also STA is an educational partner. So we want to put it out there when we proceed with our conversation. And could you talk about your role you play with the Bahamian national digital currency?
Sure. Project $10 is something that was a groundbreaking project on its own. The Central Bank of Bahamas back in 2012 actually embarked on a payment modernization effort. And fast forward 2017, they had requested for technology partners to put forward proposals on how they could essentially digitize and go cashless. from a digitalization perspective, and they were open to looking at blockchain technology. They were looking at cloud components, and they were open to the innovation in order for them to solve really big problems that they had, which around financial inclusion, around the loss of financial partners, given the de-risking that's been happening for compliance reasons and so on. But more importantly, to also eventually get to a point where you can do better KYC and meet international standards better as a country. So that was an investment that they were willing to make given the global landscape of financial services. And it's been amazing to see. It's been a really humbling experience to work with a central bank that has a leadership that says we're going to do this even when others don't believe it could be done. Imagine 2017, a central bank saying that they're going to use blockchain technology to instead of printing cash, they're going to issue it on a blockchain network. So very happy to be working with our partner Enzia, who's the contractor, and we are working on the cross-border payment solution for them. We are currently structuring how do we think about CBDCs for cross-border payments? So this is, as some companies are still trying to figure out what CBDCs are, Bahamas is giving us the opportunity to really kind of have a view of the design of the infrastructure and the architecture that will be required to support CBDC. So it's a great opportunity. I mean, being from the Caribbean, being from Haiti, I have my eyes on Haiti as well. How do we brought that out? And the partners that we worked, amazing technology when you think about the communication network that is required in emerging markets to run blockchain networks in a resilient way, right? And when the hurricane happened last year and on the Abaco Island, that's something that the governor said that they wish they had the central bank digital currency. He came out and made a press conference and said, this is why we need it, because we can't get money to people right now on the island because it's all physical cash, that it would have been so much easier to give them digital money to order and to walk into a store down the road and pay somebody else for something. Right. So the different markets and the different jurisdictions will drive their requirements. But at the core of it all, the infrastructure for digital money, for cash to go digital natively, to become alive digitally is the transformation that we're watching happening right now. It's really exciting.
I'm excited to hear that that has been at the forefront, rolling out a real life central bank digital currency. So that's a great test case and use case for us. I would really welcome you to talk about your passion at the moment, the Project New Dawn. You have invited me to work on a white paper along with Microsoft and Deloitte on board. Could you expand on that project for us?
Sure. So there are a couple of things when it comes to Project New Dawn that I'll touch on. A couple of things is entrepreneurship, and typical when a crisis happens, we had a view of what our business would look like. And Project New Dawn is essentially kind of a pivot that we did to say we thought this was going to be needed 5 years from now, but this has accelerated the need for us to talk about the need for digital cash and how do we make the case. So on, I think it was March 20th, I announced the launch of Project New Dawn, which is an EMTECH initiative. And our mission is really to engage and drive a conversation that ultimately delivers a technical solution, right, on how to bring digital cash in a peer-to-peer network on a blockchain technology to people, peer-to-peer people directly from the central bank to people. We believe cash to people as a model is not only beneficial to cash-based users, whether you have a bank account or not. If for whatever reason you use a lot of cash, whether you're a small business, you're a restaurant, you are hairdresser or whatever, you have a lot of cash that you end up having to convert to at the end of the day. It's a process issue. It's becoming cumbersome given how digital everything else is around you.
That's right.
So, in a very simple way, right? So we're going digital on everything else, and cash is still paper. I mean, that's just it. Maybe I should just say that and that's it. But there's just something weird with that.
And 1.7 trillion in circulation.
In circulation.
Yeah, think about that. Why isn't that digital?
Right. And so, but there's a lot that comes with that, right? So we have a lot of work ahead of us. So thank you for joining us in the journey, because it's one thing to say that, it's another thing to implement it in a sound way. EMTECH, we are a partner for central banks. So we think about regulatory frameworks, we think about policy, we think about impact at a country level. So we have to be very diligent on how we think about a solution to do that. But the confidence and the clear need and demand for digital currency is here. And we see it, we understand it. We think it's a matter of how. So we're in a mission to define the how.
That's outstanding, because a lot of people have been in denial about this for a while. Now everything has been accelerated on a J curve pretty much.
Yes.
The adoption, right? I've been speaking to practitioners. They're saying 3 years worth of technology has been forced into 3 months. So this is a very poignant moment for us to go full force ahead.
Yes. And but there are a couple, and one more thing on that is, as we look at the digitalization of many things, of finance, one thing that is not changing is, especially if you're going to have, I saw a report today where about 10 million people are expected to fall into extreme poverty level after COVID, right? You're going to have people who are struggling before, who are really, really struggling now, and who were really struggling before, and that just took them over the edge, right? I mean, you can see them in markets saying that we were in the middle of restructuring, we were not doing too great, but now that really killed us, right? But, and you're going to see families, a lot of families in that. And what does that mean when we think about the current banking infrastructure? What is required, or what you call bankable, is something that is real, right? I mean, the banks have a particular profile of consumer that they would like, that is attractive to them. And it is basic formula on the banking business model. You want deposits so you can make loans. So people who can keep money in the bank are the clients that you usually want, or people who can borrow money and have good credit. Those are the ones that you usually want. So as people really become, as it becomes more difficult to maintain and manage finances, we anticipate more people will become unbankable, because I don't see how the banks will change unless they will, open and loosen their rules, which We've been wanting for that to happen for a long time, but I get it. So now it's a matter of what is the alternative, right? How do you address a cash-based population that might not end up or be a good fit for the banking system? Can they have a digital cash model? And I think there's a benefit for the central banks too. As we look at the digital currency space, I don't think any of us would argue that we want every country or whole economies to be running on Bitcoins or Libra. They should absolutely be part of the conversation and the options that people have for digital currency. But the most trusted, the most reliable, the most accepted and established form of payment is cash. So we have to bring that into the same fold. It's really that simple.
I couldn't agree with you more on that. My biggest concern here, Carmelle, is the 7.5 trillion that was dispersed by our Federal Reserve as well as from the Treasury. That there's a story that about 1% would be lost to fraud. That is $70 billion. So we have to get around it. Carmelle, a lot of people are waiting to ask you questions, so I'm going to open the floor to Q&A with Haran. Thank you so much. Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Segram. Carmelle, we're going to jump straight into questions in about the 10 minutes that we have left here. So the first one is about just time frame. And this question comes from Richard. Do you have a guess for how long it'll take for central banks to create their own digital currencies? And would your system be adopted at the same time to enable exchanges between the central bank digital currencies?
Very good question. So I think every central bank will be on their own timeline. I think where we are today is a matter of roadmap, not a matter of if the central banks will do that. There are just too many benefits of doing it and two, actually many risks of not doing it. When you think about how Libra is moving forward and how China is moving forward, and certain economies really want to use that as an opportunity to compete differently in the global stage. So we do anticipate more central banks to start moving there. They're given the different drivers in each market. I anticipate each central bank in each country, or at least we advise them to even look at starting in a very narrow way, a narrow area. If you are a big country, you want to potentially start with a very small use case. If you are the Bahamas, you can establish a blockchain for the whole country, and that you can try to get around that, right? So the scope of the central bank digital currency, the size of the country, the priorities that a central bank might have. If you have financial inclusion as your priority, for all intended purposes, the Federal Reserve really doesn't. It's not, at least it's not a motivator on the central bank side. It's a motivator on the legislative side and Congress side. But different countries will drive their process differently. But over the next 3 to 5 years, I think we can safely say that Bahamas is already live. China will be live. We anticipate Bank of England will be live with something. Bank of France will definitely is actually live with a blockchain solution, just not CBDC. But they're testing a pilot right now. The South Africa Reserve Bank is also finalizing their selection for technology partner. We have some partners in East and West Africa who are also in deep dive right now, as they're hunkering down for the COVID, looking at this stuff, how they emerge from COVID, with a plan to adopt something like that. So we do anticipate, at least we see in our conversations with central banks, we see a pipeline over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you talked about the different drivers that each country has, and all those nuances across the different countries. The thing that comes to mind is regulations as well. And this question comes from Andre. You work with central banks in different countries with different banking regulations. So how do you address those differences?
We don't pretend to be the experts. We play the role of technology partner. We understand the technology, and we take the approach of working on design and priorities with the central banks. So maybe this is an opportunity to, so EMTECH, after a good 6 months, so when I left IBM, the first thing I did is hit the road to go talk to central banks. That was kind of my strategy. I had the opportunity to go to Kenya, then came back, spent a lot of time in Ghana. So because Africa was, for me, a big market and big opportunity that was being left behind, given how North America, Europe, and Asia were fully moving ahead, and Bahamas and the Caribbean. And there was not much conversation happening in Africa. And it's such a big opportunity for the continent to be able to do something like that. And sure enough, there was the appetite for that. But since then, so we took some time to find product market fit, understanding what the demands were, what the need really is, and what the pain points really are. And you can kind of, we decided to focus on working with central banks. What we emerged from that process with is that we're going to help central banks not only deploy central bank digital currencies, so we will be the technology partner in doing that, but also help them extend that central bank digital currency through services, to API services, to API platform, for them to open that to innovation, to innovators. And one slice of it that we see an opportunity that is, again, core to our values is being able to dedicate to financial inclusion. How do we build solutions now to really that targets people that want either a cash system or don't have a bank account or are not well served by the banks? That is the commercial model that we're going to build around. So yeah, I mean, that was kind of how I embraced learning, talking to the central banks and having them tell us what their priorities are, what their fears are, and address them one by one.
Yeah, and with innovation comes a lot of change, and really that's changes to existing processes. And so this question comes from Amal. I'm curious if blockchain will have to replace ACH, account clearinghouse, or the international equivalent for this government to people to happen. What is the status of ACH, and is it supported by the private sector, or is it government sponsored?
Yeah. I mean, so ACH is, I would say, kind of a government-private partnership, really. And a lot of the systems are, when the moment you start leaving the Fed wire, you start getting into clearinghouse, and it gets very interesting, the structure, the legal structure, depending on how you look at the map. If you're looking at just a connectivity map, then it looks, it looks crazy. But if you were to look at the legal role that they play to each other and how they look as a counterpart, it looks even crazier. But it's a very complicated system that essentially relies on correspondent banking. That is, for the most part, digital today. But as you know, the US does not have a real-time payment system yet. They're working on that. And it's not 24/7, right? It relies on a 9 to 5 kind of clearing mechanism, and really limits on how settlements can be done. So to answer the question, there is an opportunity to transform what the ACH system looks like. Governments that really want to change their overall infrastructure would probably deploy a blockchain platform at the core, and say CBDCs are going to be the assets that is used in the two-tier model, meaning that they provide the infrastructure and the banks, onboard on the blockchain, becomes nodes and become participant on the blockchain, and they do their interbank clearing. So technically you could have a layer that says, or one network of the blockchain that does interbank clearing, which is what ACH does today. And then if you have different wallets on a blockchain that represent what you are holding with the central bank as a reserve, then you could also, now you start bringing retail and wholesale together via different wallet mechanism instead of having two different systems. And there's a lot of talk about that as far as how that's going to get restructured. But I think every central bank, for example, the US is unique where they have 12 regional banks, right? Most countries don't particularly have that structure. So that alone, how do you, even if you were to put a blockchain network in the US, you can't really just think of the Federal Reserve. You kind of really have to think about 12 other regional banks, because they would participate in any network that would exist.
Yeah. And I know we're right at time, but I'd love to ask you one more kind of.
Yeah, I don't have a hard stop, so feel free. I have a few more minutes. That's fine.
Yeah, and this is kind of shifting gears into more about your experience, founding a company. So this question comes from Kaori, which is, do you think it's easier to have a co-founder when starting a startup? Did you have any difficulty starting your business without a co-founder?
Oh, good question. So I have a funny story about that. So when I quit, I was supposed to have a co-founder. And I know 2 other founders that actually end up in the same position, that after they quit and just the other person got cold feet, right? We're still friends. It's all good. Instead of a co-founder, he became an advisor. So it's good. But there are days that I'm happy that I don't have a co-founder. It makes the decision-making process faster. You go to your advisors and then you ask for advice, but at least the decision is ultimately yours, and you kind of have a sense of control on how you want to pivot, what is the next thing that you want to do, and where the research is kind of really leading you. But you're alone, right? I am overwhelmed with work. I wish I had a co-founder to share the work with. In a way that was effective, and we had the vision, because sometimes you hear the horror stories, right? It's people leave because they disagree on how it should be executed. It's one thing to come up with a good idea. It's another thing when you start thinking about, do you want to sell it as blockchain as a service, or do you actually want to build a whole blockchain for the Federal Reserve, right? There's a big commercialization and business decisions that you have to make that will either make you or break you, because sometimes you kind of get one shot before the competitor sees what you did wrong and then goes and does it better, right? So that I wish I had more hands and brains some days, but that's my journey. I am a solo founder. I ended up that way, but yeah, so far so good.
Yeah, always a balance act of pros and cons.
It is lack of sleep versus.
Well, wanted to say thank you so much for spending the past hour with us. It's been a real pleasure, prepping and then hosting this session with you. And I know on behalf of STA, we're all super excited to continue collaborating and working with you for the near term. Yeah, sure, no problem. I want to be sensitive. I see some Q&As here. I don't know if we can follow up via email. Happy to, feel free to share my email if someone wants to email me. I'm happy to follow up with anyone. Awesome. But thank you very much for the opportunity. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Carmelle.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenna. Thank you, Javi. See you soon, Carmelle.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.